Thank you once again for doing this interview. The objective of our entire organization is to inspire the brokenhearted to choose creative expression in the journey of going inward and going through that suffering, and then discovering love out of the darkness. So, would you like to start with your name and what your creative expression is? All of it. Yes.
My name is Kelly Elizabeth McCree. My creative expression is ever changing, just as we are as humans, ever changing. Moved and changed by our experiences as we journey through this life. Mine comes out as dance, singing, playing percussion, most recently hung drums, which is what's in the background right now. And then a huge variety of art projects and movement activities. So sewing, paper craft, collage, multimedia creations, a lot of dance, movement in the form of yoga, exercise, lately Pilates, trampoline, swimming. I'm sure there's more, but that's kind of what's current. Creating with natural objects. I use a lot of things I find in nature. I have a good eye when I'm out, and it gives me a purpose for collecting these beautiful things, and I feel like it's really important to take these things from the natural world, because I've spent all of my life surrounded by forest and trees in the different places I've lived, and to take that into cities and to places where people don't have that connection to this planet that we're on. So that's a big piece of what I do with my visual art. His name is Jameson DeMeglio, and he moved to town. He worked in the wilderness. He was a trails guy. He would maintain trails, work for the Forest Service, work for different organizations, and so he'd spend a lot of time hiking in the wilderness and carrying tools, and he was a really hard worker. So I met him because he came to this area because he had a friend here. He had most recently lived in Virginia, but he traveled for work, and he was doing a job in Nevada, and a friend of his from Virginia lived in Mount Shasta, so he would come over here and stay with her on his few days off, because he'd be on work hitches for 6 to 8 days and then have a few days off. And then I gave him the option to move into that house with me and my youngest son, who was at the time 15, and or to stay in this cabin or to go part-time between the two. And he chose to move in with us, so the three of us lived together in that house at the end of my raising kids as a single mom, and it was really precious to have, I'm gonna cry. It was really precious to have that experience of having a male role model for my son in the house with us, who was friends with my son and who loved me. At the end of raising kids, it was a long, hard haul to do it alone with no financial help. And he showed up at the end of that for the last few years, before he chose to not show up anymore. But we always kept this cabin as ours, even when we had the house in Mount Shasta, because I had a lot of things to still come down to this property for. And so this was just it was our space. It was our special space. And a lot of times he used it to come and take his own space, because he had to process things in a slower fashion than me. I would be like, oh, we had an issue. Okay, great, let's move on. Let's have a pillow fight. And then let's go have fun, right? Move beyond that now. But it would take him several days sometimes, and so he would come down here and be in the space to regroup and have what it took for him, his quiet time, his alone time. So it's always been a really healing and special place, but it was really hard to be in here after he left, and and a big journey to reclaim this as mine, and a place where I can live. It's hard work. And I opened the door and I could see Mount Shasta through the trees, but I could also see the garage where he took his life every time I opened the front door of my house. But it's important work to keep showing up and work through it and be here.
What was the impact of the reasons, like when you meditated on the why of why he did it?
It's a big story. He was a quiet person and he didn't share a lot with a lot of people, and it would take a lot of patience and time to really crack him open, to get to know the depths of who he was. And a lot of people were really lost and confused because it's a small community and we all knew each other. You know, it's a really small town here. And he didn't let on. You know, he looked calm and collected and happy, which he was really happy a lot of the times. But he suffered with big depression. He'd have waves, I could see it. It ran in his family. Both his mother and grandmother had severe depression that was really misunderstood in the era that the grandmother lived, for sure. She was in a mental institution at one point. His mother suffered sometimes to even get out of bed and help them get ready for school when he was a child. Those are the things I know about what ran in his family. So he obviously had signs of depression at times, but he moved it through exercise. He would exercise. He was so amazing. He could climb Mount Shasta on his split board and snowboard down, or he'd ride his bike up a huge hill that I could probably only do 200 yards on. And he maintained it through movement, and but he definitely suffered with depression. He did a good job of maintaining it, and his long hikes in the woods. So that's being out in the wilderness, being off the grid, being unplugged, being with nature. That was his safe haven. And he'd spent days by himself hiking, sometimes with a work team, but the hikes were silent, you know, because you're carrying tools and you're working and you're hiking hard and you can't really chat so much. And that was the place where he would open. That was the place where he would talk to people and let them into his deeper struggles. He had been bulimic for 9 or 10 years. And I was really trying to help him uncover and figure out what that was about, and help him heal. Because I too had experienced a struggle with bulimia beginning as a teen when I was on swim team and under a lot of pressure to be a perfect weight and a perfect size so that I would be the fastest and most efficient in the water. So I understood it, and so we spent a lot of time working on that and talking about it and reading books together and trying to heal that. But it was a pattern of a lot of years, and sometimes he would throw up a number of times in one day. And there's a part of the brain that I understand because I did have bulimia and I was addicted to food and to sugar, that I could understand what would happen to some degree in that place where you choose to take your life, where this feeling, this overwhelming, I have no control anymore feeling that happens when you're addicted to something, or you with food, with that bulimia cycle, when you know a binge is coming and I'm going to binge right now and there's no way I can stop it. It's like this steamroller inside of you that's not stoppable. And I feel like that brain patterning and that thing that happens when you have this addictive, self-harming pattern is the piece of his brain that made it possible for him to take his own life. On the day that he did, because he was mostly happy. He was mostly happy. But those were his big struggles. There were a number of others, and I wrote a 6-page document in the 2 months after he died that if people really wanted to know, I could email to them, because I didn't want to talk about it anymore, and people wanted to know. You know, there were just so many layers to it that I felt like it was important. That's why I wrote that. I felt that it was important for the people who really wanted to know to be able to know, because it brings a certain peace. Because people blame themselves when someone takes their life. And usually when people take their life, they're thinking that they're going to make life better for everyone around them. And that's so common of a theme for people who actually follow through and take their life, is that they think they're going to make it better. But really, it takes a burden to all the people around them to carry that burden, to carry the weight of that relationship to that person and what they could have or couldn't done, or what their last conversation was, or there's so many layers to death by suicide that are so different than any other death. And so that's why I wrote that and shared it with very few people who really wanted to know, to help them relieve that weight, because I felt like I didn't have so much of that weight. I mean, there was an element of me, sure, that wanted to blame myself, but I understood that that was not gonna help. And so I wouldn't let the what ifs and the blaming come in. If I watched my mind go there, I would just say, enough, let it go. There's nothing I can do now, and it's not my fault. We had an argument the night before he died. He had checked out. He wasn't there. His body was there. He'd come back from a work trip, and I said, I miss you, and you're still here. You're here again, but I miss you. Where are you? And I never found out. I don't know where he was. His mind wasn't there that night before he died. He just was distant. He was checked out. He was somewhere else. I don't know what had happened, and I never will. Because he didn't crack open. He didn't let me in. I asked him just to come up and watch the sunset on the mountain with me, just to spend time with me, and we didn't even have to talk, and he wouldn't come. He wanted to lay in the bed and stare out the door. And then I came back home and I was just sad. I just wanted him to connect with me. I wanted him to be present with me. I missed him, and he was still there, but I missed him. And we made up the next morning, but he was still quiet and mopey, and that was the last I saw of him. And it's a hard place for someone to leave you when things are not feeling the best. You know, it's a lot to work through. It's a lot to work through. But you can't focus on that. You can't focus on that part. You focus on all the beauty and the way we had a family together, and the way we lived together, and the way we came together, and the way we created together, and that love that I got to experience, that depth of love, that depth of being cared for, caring for my kid as well as me, and being a part of our lives and all the things he taught us and showed us, and the beautiful ways he lived this earth. That's the stuff you gotta focus on. It it's important to keep cracking open that box, right? Just open it, look inside. See what's there, feel it, and then let it go. Let it move through it. Because there's always something else on the other side. There's always a different perspective. There's always a different way to look at it. There's always a different angle, a different way to move. I practice that in my dance. Like, what's a way I've never moved before? What's an angle I've never looked at something at before? Just remembering there's always different ways to move through things. There's always more than we already know. It's pretty infinite. There's an infinite amount of possibilities when you choose to get creative and choose to look at things from a different angle. One of my artistic themes after Jameson died became making rainbows in the dark, because rainbows in the dark are a miracle. Because you have to shine your own light to make a rainbow in the dark. Because I had to go in the garage where he died and where I found him dead. Because all my stuff was in there, was my storage. And I had to go and touch that doorknob and walk inside over and over because I couldn't burn it down and I couldn't take it to the bottom of the sea. I owned the property and all my stuff was in there. So we painted it turquoise and black and purple and put some rainbows in the dark in there and transformed the space with color. And I built altars in there. I built a beautiful Dia de los Muertos altar. To all the people that I've known and loved who've passed away in my life. And my friend and I sat in the space where he died, and I don't know, maybe we were burning some Palo Santo, some kind of, we were burning something that made charcoal, and we were drawing with the charcoal on the concrete. And as much as it was torturous and terrible to have to keep going back in the space, it's also forced me to keep opening that box, to keep looking back inside at that grief and that trauma and that tragedy and the post-traumatic stress that it leaves the people that find the dead people. And that person's final moments, their final thoughts, and that unknown, the shit that you never, ever, ever really get to know. Because they're gone and you can't talk to them and you can't work it out anymore. But having that space, having that on my property, having the reality that I had to keep coming here, I couldn't just burn the place down, meant that I had to keep opening that box. And as much as I hated it, it became a gift. Sometimes you have to learn to love the things that break you down and you really hate, because it transforms them. And it transforms you personally when you're willing to open that box of grief and sorrow and heartache and trauma and pain. But then it comes a time you have to close it and walk away from it and go to the other side. But there's a balance. There's a balance we have to hold. Learning how to hold hands with grief and joy, with grief and magic, with grief and love, with a heartache, with tragedy. Holding hands with the dark and the light. We live on a planet with a cycle of dark and light. Every day we face the dark and every day we face the light. And they don't exist without each other. There's a balance. And that balance changes depending on where you are in the earth. The balance changes, right? And the more we just learn to ride that and roll with it, that's been some of my biggest lessons. My life is joyful and magical and unbelievably profound and amazing, even in the wake of this trauma, this weight that I bear and that I carry. And so I try to compost it, transmute it, to take the ugly, the horrible, the sad, the traumatic, the depressed, the grief parts, and put them in the compost pile and let them take their time, just like Jameson would, to grow into something else, right? To make food for something else, to make nutrition, nourishment, sustenance for other things to grow and come out of it. It's not easy work. It's all work. Just like what you're doing, it can become beautiful and joyful and powerful and impactful and inspirational and transformative, and it can be. And for those of us who survive these things, we become the balm for the channels, the gates, the gatekeepers, right? For others who are in need, who don't have a friend, who don't have a connection, who don't have a place to express themselves or create or share or vision or dream. Community connections, that became one of the other big pieces of my survival. So a term I've coined is the community therapy. That's what I did. I went out to the world, and I didn't know I was seeking community therapy, but that's what I found. Because I couldn't be in my hometown. I couldn't be here. It was too hard to be in the home that we loved. It was too hard to be in this cabin that was my safe space. My safe spaces were scary and hard and unbelievable to be in without him, in the way that when someone chooses to leave, it's hard. It's a different kind of hard than when someone dies from cancer, or someone dies and you know it's coming. Sudden death, traumatic death, suicide, it's all very different. And when it's the person who's your daily person, it's very different. So I couldn't be here very much. It was hard. It was really hard to be here, and I would just leave, which was scary too. I wrapped my head in my scarf and wore my sunglasses, and I don't think I took that scarf off when I was out in public for a year and a half. So I always had a place to hide and grieve if I just needed to be. Even if I was out in the world on the city street in New York, I could put my sunglasses on and sit up against a wall and create a safe space to grieve in the middle of whatever was happening. Or I'd go to concerts and I would scream during the loud music. There was so much anger I had to. And I would just dance my heart out, and I would scream and move and cry and lay on the floor and have post-traumatic stress meltdowns in the middle of a dance floor with strangers surrounding me and holding me and creating a safe space for me to go through that stuff. I had one on the dance floor. I had this recurring thing that was so heavy and hurting in my heart that I wished I was able to stay in the space with his body longer, but I couldn't do it. And it was so strange, but I had this thing where I was upset with myself because I wanted to have spent a night of vigil with his body and put flowers around him and just love him and honor him and sit with his body. And I couldn't be in there. And so I did it on the dance floor. I had no idea. Like, the stuff that would come out, I would never expect. I would never plan it. I'd just get into that movement. I'd get into that primal, the rhythms of the heartbeat of the music in my body, and it brings you into that real place of connection with this planet, of our life. And I would get into these dances. There were silent dances where it's a static dance, and anyone could just move in any way you want. You can lay on the floor, you can dance, you can jump up and down, you could do yoga, you could just be completely still. It's free, and you don't talk. So I would go to these dances, and in this particular one, somehow that came through that moment. I would just, sometimes the PTSD, I would drop into those moments. And there I was. I wasn't on the dance floor anymore. I was in the garage with his dead body. And I was on the dance floor surrounded by a bunch of people. Most of them I didn't know. And so I got down on my hands and my knees and on the dance floor, and I put those flowers all around his dead body. And then I sat in vigil with him during the rest of the dance set. Because really, the way the post-trauma brain works, like, I was there. It didn't look like it to anyone else. They had no idea what was happening. But I was there in that fucking garage with his dead body. And after I did that, it would exhaust me. At work, having those exits from my body, I would call them, would be exhausting. And after I did that work, I would be exhausted for a while, but I would a lot of times move through things. Like, then I stopped having that recurring, but you didn't do that, you didn't do that, you know, and I would be upset and angry and sad. But being able to work it out in those ways in a safe container with movement and rhythm and community and people witnessing, even if they had no idea, to not be in my bed by myself, eating sugar or doing heroin or any of the things I dreamed of doing to escape. I would go out in public, pretty sober, even though I didn't want to be, because I just wanted to get addicted to something and escape. But I would make myself show up over and over and over. And I have to look like this in the front of a bunch of people that didn't know me, because I would get cracked open and I would cry, and sometimes I would wail, and sometimes I would scream, and sometimes I would pound or stomp. And people would hold me, and I would hold them, and they would see my pain, and it would access theirs on these dance floors. I had a young woman one time sitting in my lap weeping. After there was no talking. I was just going through my shit on the dance floor, and it opened her. And she sat on my lap, and I held her, and she cried. And it brought me back into, like, that balance, right? Of being in this place of need and not being able to give or do anything, and having people create a container around me so that I could do that weird shit that I was gonna do on the floor or in front of everyone. And then it would flip sometimes. And I was cradling this beautiful young woman. She was probably 17 at the time, in tears. And we had no idea each other's pain or each other's stories. The stories didn't matter. We were going through the experience of grieving together and sharing each other's pain and heartache, because we're all human and we all have that. Yeah. And we all carry it, and some people hide it, and some people spew it, and some people do a wide range in between, because our culture doesn't really offer the tools, and it's a really death-phobic culture, and there's generations and generations of people from all sorts of various levels of dysfunction and disconnection to the planet that we live on, to our resources, to each other, to music, to good food, to the things that really feed our body, mind, and spirit, to practices that nourish us, to knowing small techniques to calm yourself. To be reminders of those places that I touch and I learn from and I grow from, and then how you can balance that giving and receiving. There are times where you can't give. There are times where you really just can't give. And there are times where you really just need to receive. And the more we learn to balance that and understand that that comes and goes, just like that place for people who want to die. That feeling's going to come and go. It'll go. Sometimes it might take a year and a half to get out of a depression, because you haven't found the right tools yet. You haven't found the right things that work for you. But there's so many out there. There's so many resources. We live in a world of resources. Especially with the internet. There's access to anything. And to find each other. We can find each other now in a way that we couldn't before. this project. You know, it helps people connect and find each other and hear these stories. And the more of that we do, the more of that we do this community therapy, the more we're going to heal our culture, our planet, ourselves, our lineages of trauma and grief and dysfunction. We don't have to carry them. Let that shit go.
You're amazing. Can I give you a hug?
Yeah.